Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. Districts, budgets, benchmarks, we'll try to cover it all in 1/2 hour. Kelly McNeil joins us from KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas. Price Dooley from the University of Central Arkansas's Political Science faculty, and Hal Bass from the Political Science staff at OBU. Thanks, everybody, for coming in. And we'll start with redistricting. Kelly, we've got three members of the Board of Apportionment. We now have 3 maps. 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, and it seems likely that the Democratic view will prevail anyway.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. The maps presented by the governor and attorney general are not too far off from one another, farther off anyway than from the Secretary of State, who's a Republican. Not huge dramatic shifts, but obviously some consolidation where that had to happen due to the population, and breaking up other areas where that was called for. There was a lot of talk about a majority Hispanic district possibly being created, and none of the 3 saw that as particularly feasible. There's a district that's sort of majority minority if you take in all minority groups, but none of the members of the Board of Apportionment proposed a majority Hispanic district. They heard a lot of feedback from current legislators about wanting to, keep their current districts, their current constituencies, and that happened for some, but not for others, at least according to the maps presented by the 2 Democrats. And not huge shakeups as far as majority Black districts go, majority African American districts in the Delta. There were some differences between the Republican Secretary of State, his proposal, and the Democrats. He wanted actually more majority African American districts, a few more of such districts, but those districts would have had, a lot of them, a very slim majority African American. So, there's some rhetoric there about who really stands by the African American population more than the other. But I don't think you'll see a lot more hue and cry about these maps other than what we've already been seeing through the whole process.
Every 10 years there almost have to be at least a few collisions and a few districts that shape-shift a little bit just to accommodate that population out-migration anyway in the Delta and the South Arkansas Price. But ethnic representation is always a key
there's a couple
consideration.
Definitely, there are a couple of different things that actually have occurred really relative to this. I mean, when you look at the different maps, I think that the governor proposed, if I'm not mistaken, 11 majority minority districts, African American districts. So I think there are 13 right now. Yep. The Secretary of State proposed 15. And so I think the issue that the governor may have, or the board in general, if we go with the predominant Democratic view relative to majority minority districts, African American districts, it could run afoul of the Jeffers v. Clinton decision from, I think it was circa 1990, which at that point mandated that the Board of Apportionment actually create more African American districts. And so when you're reducing from 13 down to 11, that could be an issue. On a slightly another note, relative to the Senate maps, the Republicans are a little upset, though, also relative to how some of the boundaries were drawn, and it seemed almost overtly partisan. Is what they're crying. You're obviously going to go ahead and get that from the Republican side. So not only do you have concern from Tracy Steele, actually talked about who is the head of the Black Legislative Caucus. He stressed some concerns relative to how the boundaries are drawn, and on the Republican side, Republicans are a little upset from in their view, the partisan nature in terms of how they're drawn. So it's interesting in terms of what's going to actually happen relative to this.
Hal, thoughts?
Well, I think that the issues that have arisen pertain, as we've already noted, one, to the number of majority-minority districts. With 13 now, it's going to be 11, 15. It's going to be 11, arguably. The status of incumbents, the protected status of incumbents, and Democratic incumbents are going to get the better hand as opposed to Republican incumbents. And then the inevitable divisions of political units, counties, even communities, necessitated by the population shifts and the requirement that the populations of the various units be relatively equal. I think of these three broad concerns, the one that's going to have the most rhetorical significance is going to be the majority-minority district issue. And I think there the question becomes who is the beneficiary of the I guess expectation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that representation of minorities in electoral districts be advanced. And what's generally happened in the South is that the move in this direction has advantaged African American office seekers. It's advantaged representation for African Americans in the legislature, and it's advantaged the Republican Party by packing African Americans, voters, into districts and then leaving the other districts more white and, given political dynamics, more amenable to Republican nominees.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kelly noted there was some a pushback from the administration on Mr. Martin, the GOP Secretary of State. His plan to create 2 more minority districts than the governor's plan would, and there was some pushback from the administration that, well, yeah, that's fine, but when you dilute minorities, you may create a majority black district, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to automatically go to an African American or an ethnic minority, given the overall constitution of that district. Or
necessarily advance the political expectations and interest of African American voters statewide here.
Right.
I think really the Democratic Party, the governor and the Secretary of State, in a lot of ways, are from a partisan perspective, they're really swimming upstream. I mean, because 2012, with the President Obama at the top of the ticket.
Thanks for the segue. That's where we were headed. Go ahead.
At the top of the ticket, Arkansas already made historic gains for Republicans in the legislature. 45 out of 100 seats in the legislature, in the Senate, holding 15 of the 35. It really does look to be Arkansas flipping in the legislature, both in the Senate and the House, particularly with an unpopular president, a bad economy, and this deficit crisis that doesn't seem like it's ever going to end.
Yeah, Kelly?
I was just going to say, I think we probably overemphasize the significance of district boundaries when we talk about statewide outcomes. It's going to be a marginal effect. Now, at the margins, in a very competitive environment, you could tip the scales one way or the other. But you're not going to see a transformation of the landscape achieved through redistricting. Other forces and factors are driving us in that direction, not the district lines.
Right. Kelly, sense of it?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think you see that in the way some of the districts have been drawn, that you are seeing less outcry from some of the incumbents or some of the legislators who are affected, and more from a couple of the Republicans like Representative Sanders or Senator Raper, who are more directly affected by exactly where these lines were drawn, and that's going to heavily affect them in this next election. But looking out 6, 8, 10 years, it depends a lot more on, as Hal said, the political climate, how it's changing in Arkansas, and the individual quality of candidates that we're going to be seeing than it does on these individual lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, to put a little finer point on it, looking ahead just 1 year and maybe 3 months from now, at this particular moment, are the Republicans in Arkansas basically just flying the flag when they protest? I mean, I can't find one who's not smiling.
They're certainly
at their prospects next year.
They're certainly not overly vocal. I'd agree with that. It could have been a lot uglier. It really could have. I'm not going to attribute, motives or anything to what people are not saying.
Right.
But
just going back to Hal's point, that there are much larger factors at play, likely to be on price to next year than just whether you lose a county or lose 2 or 3 precincts and pick up 4 or 5 in another direction.
And what matters now are the Democrats who did suffer a tremendous setback in 2010 statewide, are they going to be able to recruit candidates to run, strong candidates
That's key.
to run?
That's very key.
Or will the demoralization of 2010 carry over here?
And there's a broader trend in the South. Again, if you look at regional politics, and you have to take that into account, most other southern states have actually gone to the Republican Party, have gone conservative. I think Arkansas, Mississippi are the only 2 states that have both legislatures that are still under Democratic control. So almost from a regional perspective, there is a headwind that the Republican Party has behind them, and you're right. They are I would almost say the Republican Party is gleeful in the state of Arkansas relative to their prospects in 2012.
I should have looked at the map, but I didn't think to do it. But I would think that there are at least 2 or 3 southern states in which the old Dixie, old Confederacy, the old solid South, where the only seats in the House are now occupied in that particular state's delegate are occupied by ethnic minorities in urban areas, or regions anyway, that are heavily ethnic.
That's correct, which goes back to Hal's point.
Yep.
Relative to when you look at redistricting and you look at the creation of majority minority districts, it often comes at the expense of democratic control of legislatures. But there are more factors in that are involved relative to that. Again, I think the economy plays a huge role, and again, I look at the real unpopularity of the president.
Well, in Washington, our 3 delegates who are Republicans seem to be marching pretty much in lockstep with Mr. Cantor, their leader on the budget matter anyway. In the meantime, their speaker is in discussions with the president. On the other side of the Capitol, there is the 2 party leaders are talking, but so are 6, now 8 of their colleagues. So we have 4 sets of discussions going on the budget. Where are we? Hal?
It shifts from moment to moment here. And as you indicate, there's a lot of moving parts in this discussion. And it's going to be interesting how they shake out over the next 10, 12 days. At the risk of trying to oversimplify a very, very complex reality, we do have a demand, if you will, to raise the debt ceiling in the short run by August 2nd. We also have a broad consensus that we need to do something to reduce the deficit. We have disagreement as to the balance of spending cuts versus revenue increases required to do that. And we have, as Price has indicated a couple times, an economic situation that very much complicates any efforts to either raise taxes or cut spending in the short run if we want to keep the economy moving forward, as opposed to having it go back into recession. And how we square those circles, I think, is going to be a very interesting challenge for all parties.
Well, Mr. Crawford, Mr. Griffin, Mr. Womack all seem to be firmly, at this particular moment anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, but they all, no more taxes. That seems to be their posture. I have not seen, and maybe again I'm wrong, but I have not seen any signals from any of the 3 that they would accept any revenue enhancement.
I was just going to say that I think it's really part of the 87 House freshmen Republicans who came in really on that no tax pledge, and they're trying to hold firm to that. I will just say I'm really amazed, though, at the level of acrimony that's going on between the two parties. I know it's been there before, but I think you contribute this really to the decline of moderates in both the House and the Senate nationally. I mean, the parties are firmly ideologically opposed, but no sane person, no sane economist, no sane political pundit would go ahead and say that we should not raise the debt ceiling. And so in the face of a catastrophic event for our nation, I don't really understand why they don't get some kind of deal done, whether it entails revenue enhancements or not. I mean, I think that the deal that was on the table at one point for one of these was a 3-to-1, three cuts to the budget versus one part
$3 for a buck.
Yeah, exactly. And then there were some people were upset about that, and so then they said, well, instead of having the revenue come first, we'll have the cuts come first and the revenue enhancements later. But they've got to work something out, and pretty quickly, because the markets are starting to spook, in my view.
You mentioned the polarization, and there are, in fact, some of those freshmen on the House side who say no debt. I mean, cut cap. But even those Republicans who say, all right, fine, we'll take a deal in exchange for some deficit reduction, and the Democrats who say, yeah, we'll take a deal someday. Where to cut? I mean,
the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
On both sides there. And there is, I think, a profound lack of trust on the part of the rank and file of both congressional parties with the leadership for the House Republicans and with the Congressional Democrats with President Obama. That's complicating affirming or confirming any deal that ultimately gets negotiated by the leadership.
How many times?
And we don't have much time
how many times in the
to
last,
get this done.
How many times in the last 2 months has the House cut its Speaker off at the knees after these discussions at the White House?
Well, and in the whatever deal that is likely to be made, it'll probably be quite painful for a lot of Democrats, including the kind of Democrats that Arkansas has elected, because you can't cut the deficit without making changes to Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, the entitlements, and that's exactly the kind of thing that Arkansas Democrats have vowed to protect. And so we're seeing already in these different plans floating out that there are some very uncomfortable cuts that stand to be made, and that sounds good as part of a package, but come election year, there'll be some very harsh ads, I suspect, dealing with both Democrats and Republicans, what they've been willing to do at this time.
Mm-hmm. Granny off the cliff spots.
Well, folks generally want spending cuts in areas that hurt someone else. Folks are willing to tolerate tax increases for someone else. There's a lot of talk now that we'll keep rates where they are, even drop them, and focus on the loopholes. But loopholes are there because they have constituencies. And it's going to be
one person's loopholes. Yeah.
Mortgage interest.
Charitable contributions.
Yeah.
It's going to be very, very difficult to sell a plan once it's announced that does address these loopholes.
Everyone hang on. We got more benchmark scores this past week. And you guys deal with, at the university level, you deal with a product of our K-12 system. Hal, impressed with what you see?
Well, you take your good news where you find it here. Yeah. And the good news was that overall our benchmark scores are rising. They're rising more at the lower levels than they are at the middle levels. And we need to remember these are Arkansas-based benchmarks. And we're getting ready to move to a nationally normed set of expectations. And we don't know how our progress is going to play out when we change the base for evaluation. But the bottom line is good news is good news.
Yeah, Price.
I think that's a great point. Just to add on Hal's point, I just want to say that there was a study that was done in last year, 2010, by the University of Arkansas, which looked at the performance of high school students on the ACT, and compared with other students around the nation. Arkansas students still perform below the national averages. So again, relative to there is improvement on our self-defined benchmarks, so there's improvement there, again, in the lower levels, just exactly how I was saying. But I will say, though, that we still are lagging behind the national averages in every single category.
It'll be interesting to see how we match up when we go to the national test, because there have been really significant improvements made according to this test that we've been administering. When you talk about going from 50% students being proficient at their grade level, math and reading, several years ago, up to around 70-75% in a lot of cases now. That's pretty remarkable. And there are questions about whether it's a lot of teaching to the test and that kind of thing, but that's still a pretty significant change.
I detect somehow apprehension out in the state over the shift to the national norm.
Sure, we fear the unknown, and we know that historically we have ranked relatively low on national standards in general. So when we move to national, there's a reasonable expectation that we'll see our relative progress limited here.
Okay, on to another issue, and this sort of takes us back to Washington, and that's the matter of the federal judiciary in Arkansas. I don't recall it, well, 20 years ago, before the great wave of polarization, anyway, ideological polarization hit the United States. It didn't take that long to nominate and get a judge confirmed. Now it is root canal. And we've had now 3 new nominees sent up that both Mr. Pryor and Mr. Bozeman, traditionally being a Senate prerogative, seem to agree on. But there's no guarantee that anybody will be seated soon. Price?
Well, I know that this week one of the nominees made it through the Judiciary Subcommittee by 15-3 vote. Although I think Senator Grassley of Iowa expressed some reservations about her and said that while he went ahead and removed his objection, that he still reserved the right in a full Senate vote to go ahead and raise it again. So this again is you're looking at partisan politics of Washington, D.C., which I think frustrates Arkansans locally and American people at large.
Yeah.
We're also looking at a new norm by the Senate minority, whoever that minority is, to play hardball on the issue of confirmations and to use the threat of a filibuster to essentially stall or defeat nominations that clearly have majority support and that once upon a time would have largely gone through without much hue and cry. And that's just the environment we live in the current age of polarization. And it makes it very, very difficult. One might argue, and I don't know of research on this, that having a divided state delegation in the Senate might work the advantage of judicial nominees coming from that state, in the sense that in this case, Senator Bozeman could provide some bona fides for the nominees who came out this week in a way that former Senator Lincoln could not have provided to the Republican minority with over 40 votes, who was inclined to reject or at least stall any nomination coming from the White House.
I am reminded, I read not long ago, and perhaps one of you guys, being the scholars, can correct me, but President Roosevelt nominated a Supreme Court, Douglas nominated a justice of the Supreme Court, not a federal district judge yet, but nominated a Supreme Court justice on a Friday, and 6 working days later, the justice was on the court.
Judiciary committee hearings are a fairly modern post-war phenomenon here.
All right. What about the week ahead? More summer, Kelly?
Yeah, more hot weather. I've been saying it's been really interesting with the hot weather spreading across the Midwest and into the North. It's been really interesting to see the rest of the nation react to Arkansas-type heat.
And reacting they are. Anyway, thanks to everybody for coming in. Thanks to you, as always, for joining us. See you next week. Stay tuned.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.